Hello and welcome to another episode of V's Perspective. It's been a hiatus, but this is particularly on a critical topic, uh, combining all the factors that are impacting India's foreign policy as well as India's major power relations. And I think it is critical because of the rapidity with which everything is unfolding, impacting foreign policy and impacting countries' outlook in this region, in the Indo-Pacific region, as well as beyond. Now, first among this is the transitioning relationship with the United States. It is important from the perspective of the fact that India-US relations today is consequential not just from an economic perspective, given the amount of trade between the two countries, but also because of a rapidly shifting Trumpian foreign policy and the tariff pressure that has really created an onslaught on the Indian economy before they reached a trade deal. And therefore, the trade deal becomes very important in today's perspective. India and the US have agreed to a framework agreement, which is eventually going to pave way, at least that's the expectation, for a trade deal. And I think it's important from the perspective of the fact that it'll galvanize both economies. You're talking about the world's largest economy and the world's fourth largest economy, and what they can do coming together on a scale that has not been tested before. Now, the second point about the India-US trade relationship is, of course, the fact that what will come out, given that it's Trumpian, it may be understood as Trumpian bluster because Trump announced a few things on social media which seemed as if he was going ahead of the curve, ahead of himself, and ahead of the expectations from India and the United States combined. And therefore, it's important to get a realistic vision and idea of India-US trade deal. The first is the fact that there was a subsequent revision in some of the language that the initial framing, from the initial framing that the agreement saw. And I think that's a readjustment that was a function of the understanding that the expectations and reality are not face to face from the side of the United States. So the question of 500 billion of of imports that the United States is that India is supposed to buy from the United States is, of course, something that 500 billion is a huge number, and it outdoes in all its aspects the joint statement that India and the US signed when Prime Minister Modi visited Washington last year. The second factor, which could actually bring a realistic sort of understanding to the 500 billion figure, is the idea that the trade that the sectors are being talked about. The sectors that are being talked about is energy, aircraft manufacturing, and those are large sectors. Then there is coal import. Those are large sectors, but they will have their own ordered impacts for both the economies in terms of how much realistically can the two bring together deliverables on the table. The second is the energy component. I think it's important from the perspective of the fact that it's being talked about in consequence to India's relationship with Russia. And I think it's important to understand that India's relationship with Russia is regardless of India's relationship with the United States until at least until the Ukraine-Russia war started. But gradually, as the Trump administration is finding difficult to bring the Russia-Ukraine conflict to a halt, I think that frustration is sort of seeping into other channels. And I think what we are seeing as the pressure, as a pressure growing both from the Congress, and Lindsey Graham is at the helm of that US pressure. We are seeing some of that translate and some of that channeled towards India and many more economies. But certainly it's different when it's compared to China, because China is the largest buyer, and because it has a certain leverage against the United States, it's difficult for the US really to press China as it can press other countries like India. But as was highlighted, it is important to note that the External Affairs Minister clearly highlighted in the Munich Security Conference that um, oil is a commodity, and I think private players are free to take their own independent decisions in a democracy. So we will see how the energy rechanneling takes place. But to understand that the relationship with the United States will come at a cost of relationship with Russia, maybe getting ahead of oneself. And I think maybe a sort of understanding of India Russia that may not be um, sufficiently wide in its scope and spectrum. So I think that nuance is important. The third is, of course, the idea that um, the U.S.-India relationship, and particularly from the point of the tariff and the slew of policies that have come from Washington in the past year, is really suggestive of the idea that India has moved into a different stack of countries than before. When we are talking about the power rungs of the first few states in the world, and I think it's important from that change of power compartment, if you will, for India in the power rung of global states. India is being treated differently. Some of that may be a function of growing capabilities and capacities of India, and some of them are a function of the expectations that the world has from India, and therefore you see some of this gamut really changing rapidly, um, and some of them will problematize your rise as an economy and polity, because some of the externalities are moving much faster than your expectations, and then the momentum of your economic and political rise, and that could cause certain sort of mismatch at the global level. But what is important, and this is really important, that what is critical is that the Trumpian set of policies has really jolted countries out of their slumber. And I think what India has done in terms of its willingness to carry out reforms, both internal economic and labor reforms, as well as external in terms of diversifying, and not just banking on China plus one, but I think China plus a lot of countries. I think that diversification strategy is important from a large market perspective. Let me stop here. Thank you.